practice is in Moonee Ponds. I work individually with children, adolescents and adults, and it's beautiful work which has also spent most of this year on telehealth. So I'm on the other end of a computer with my clients. Luckily in the last few weeks we've started to have face-to-face sessions. So I'm hoping that you find today's session helpful, and no matter where you are and what's going on in your life, I'm hoping there might be something that is interesting for you. I'm going to talk a little bit about understanding anxiety. I think it may be a little misunderstood in the community, looking at signs and symptoms and type of anxiety. And then really, what do we do with it? How do we live well with anxiety? How do we build well-being and resilience? And you might be listening to this session for yourself, feeling that perhaps you're looking for some tips and techniques. You might be listening on behalf of someone else in your family or friendship network where you're saying, what might I be able to do to help them? So I don't know how you feel, but sometimes it feels like our mind is just full like this. And I don't know how I find you today at midday on a Friday afternoon, but some people say, my mind feels like this all the time. It's just working. What's wrong with me? And I would say absolutely nothing is wrong with you. That's the job of our mind. It's an amazing kind of holder of information and data, and it can feel like it's bursting. On average, we have something like 70 to 90,000 thoughts a day. And some of those are really important and valuable. Some of them are just like junk email in our inbox, and it's all stuffed in there. So I think this just makes us really human. And some of the work is actually untangling some of those strings at times, or just taking out the colored yarns that we need. But if it feels like it's like that all of the time, there might be something that we want to stop and have a look at. So I don't know what it's like for you. I put as the title of this topic, Managing Anxiety in Uncertain Times. It may be that because of COVID-19 this year, you've experienced anxiety for the first time, or things have really changed in your world, or it might be that anxiety has been something that you've lived with for a lot of your life, even pre-COVID. We know that during these last number of months since COVID came on the scene, we've heard a lot about the uncertainty. For some people, there's been lots of loss, depending on what's happened with their work, what's happened with their family situation. For others, just as I was talking to Julie before we came online, where she said, geez, I'm having to learn this whole new Zoom webinar. This is all new. There's been lots of accelerating change. So for a lot of us, there's been new possibilities. For some of us, it might even be reevaluation, maybe thinking about, well, maybe there's some things that I liked about the lockdown. We don't know that, but it's certainly this experience of living through a pandemic has caused a lot of upheaval for many of us. And I think not just about COVID, but even about mental health and well-being, we always want to keep in mind context is everything. For some of us, COVID and the repercussions of it may not have been so bad. For others, it's been really trying, really devastating. And it's this part on this picture here. If I'm standing on this side of the screen, I see a number 6. If I'm standing on that side of the screen, I'm seeing a number 9. And actually, we're both right, but it's seeing things from a different perspective. And I think that's a really important point. You heard right throughout the press conferences, the message from the government about we're all in this together. But just because we're all in the pandemic together doesn't mean that we've got the same points of view, doesn't mean that our bodies and our minds respond in the same way. So we've always got to think about not only our context, but what's the context of my co-workers, or what's the context of other friends. It might be different to my experience. So just to start off with, I want to talk briefly about what anxiety is and to really normalize it. And what I mean by that is I think that anxiety is kind of a much maligned term, like it's some terrible disease, whereas we're saying anxiety is your body's really natural and normal response to threat. And we need it. So that little curve that you see on your screen there is often called the optimum performance curve. And it talks about how if we have too little stress, not enough motivation or stimulation, it can lower our performance. A little bit of anxiety or stress actually boosts our performance, might get us energized, might mobilize us into action or keep us safe. Too much stress into that red zone, overwhelm, feeling burnt out. So we're really saying, firstly, everyone feels a little anxious at times. If you don't feel anxious, it's probably that you're not living fully and not challenging yourself. That's really normal. But what isn't normal is if you're spending a lot of your time in that red burnout zone. And it's saying we want to just look at, as human beings, and actually most animals in the animal kingdom are designed to surf those waves or that curve. Little bit of anxiety and stress comes to a peak, tapers off. But if we're stressed all the time, our body and our mind can become quite worn out. And I put this little picture here because sometimes our minds and our thoughts are the ones that can, things that can keep us in that stress or anxiety zone. So that picture there, for any of you who are surfing fans, was Mick Fanning in a surfing competition a few years back, when all the commentators and all the people on the shoreline, it was being broadcast, it was a massive event, saw that shark approaching Mick Fanning. He didn't see it. Obviously, he turned around at the moment, noticed the shark there, all of his stress and anxiety response kicked in, paddled away, and the rest is history. He was safe and well. And it's saying that's actually his body and what our bodies do in response to a real threat. I see a shark, there is some sort of danger, and my body mobilizes, anxiety comes in, and I get out of danger. I run away, I fight, whatever it is. And it's saying that's a really appropriate response. We want our bodies to function like that. What then happens though is our bodies are not that good at distinguishing between a real threat, the shark is definitely in the water, and an imagined or a thought about virtual threat. So I'm worried about this. I'm worried about a shark could be in the water. And if I worry about that enough, that sort of anxiety response. So it's really just trying to notice the difference. Is my current level of anxiety in response to a real threat, something that I have to face, something that I'm enduring? That's one type of anxiety. Or is it that I notice that I've got this constant state of worry, constant state of imagining future events? What if this happens? What if that happens? And if you've got a lot of that, you might notice these anxiety symptoms, and they can be different. I've only listed a few there. They can be different for different people. It comes out differently in everyone's bodies. Some people say, I notice that I've got lots and lots of these unhelpful thoughts. I worry about things that could happen, or I worry about things that I did do. Why did I say that? Why did I do that? I have negative thoughts about myself or the future. Some people say, as well as the unhelpful thoughts, I notice that I've got physical symptoms of anxiety. And if it's the first time that you've had it, people are often confused. They'll go to their doctor and think that they've got a heart complaint, or they'll think that they've got a digestive issue. And it's saying, well, all of these things can be physical symptoms of anxiety. And I may also start to notice that I've got unhelpful behaviours associated with anxiety. Things like I start to avoid. I don't go to places because I'm too worried, or I don't engage in certain behaviours because my anxiety is too high. So you might notice and say, I think I've got all of these, I think I've got some of them, or I might have different ones. So it's just starting to notice, do I have these symptoms and how long am I spending time in them? Because as I said to you, that red zone, which is the threat state or the really high, frantic, anxious state, we want our bodies to be in there and to respond. When someone's attacking us, when action is required, we definitely need the red zone to kick in. But we also want to be able to move that dial, and we want to be able to get ourselves into this blue zone, which is, it's safe. There's no tiger in the room. There's no shark in the water. I'm safe. I'm okay. And for many of us, we're finding that we're permanently in a state of being frazzled or stressed or anxious. And our bodies really need us to be able to recalibrate or get us back into that blue zone. And so I think it's really important. And some of the things that I'll talk about in the second half of the session is what can we actually do to get us back into the blue zone. Animals in the animal kingdom have it down pat. You know, they get into the red zone, there's a predator approaching, there is a massive kind of fight or flight or freeze. The predator either eats them for lunch or they run away or they get eaten, and then they go back to resting under a tree. It's this lovely kind of balance of peaks of stress followed by rest, recuperation, recovery, calm. And as human beings, what we're finding is unless we do it really deliberately, many of us in this modern world are deprived of those moments of recovery, of calm, of safety. And we want to get more into that. Now, not everyone who has anxiety symptoms will develop a disorder. So it's quite possible that you might be going through a stressful event or a stressful time in your life. You do have a lot of that going on, and then it passes and it doesn't develop into a disorder. For others, it might start to persist and it becomes more fixed, and it may need more attention because it's not passing. And some people might be suffering from a generalized anxiety disorder, and the best description that they give when they talk about it is, I just seem to worry about everything. And even when there's nothing to worry about, I worry about there's nothing to worry about. It's quite a debilitating pattern. Others are saying, well, I don't really worry about, work, or I don't seem to have worries about everything, but I am worried in social settings. I don't like talking in public, or I don't like going to parties, or when there's social events. That really persists. And it's something that follows me around in all social settings. Others have a panic disorder, which means that the anxiety comes out in a really physical way. Others can have obsessive compulsive disorders, which means that I have certain rituals or superstitions or beliefs about if I don't do certain things, something bad might happen to me, or I need to check that I've switched off the lights before I go out. And again, some people, when I talk about this, will say, oh, I check the lights 3 times before I go out. Does it mean that I have OCD? And I say to them, as with most of the answers to mental health, is that a problem for you? Does it stop you having a good, full, healthy life? And if the answer is no, then checking the lights 3 times is no issue. If the answer is yes, it's quite debilitating. I find it really difficult to leave the house, or those thoughts are just constantly plaguing me. Well, then it's saying, well, it is affecting my life and I would like to work on it. And for some people, they can suffer from post-traumatic stress after a very traumatic event in their life or a very stressful one. And so these are all disorders that you may work with someone in a professional area if you find that some of the self-help strategies that I'm going to talk about soon don't seem to be working, or there is more work for you to be done, and some of them may require medication. So the first point of call is if you go to your GP. That's often where people will start off with their local doctor saying, I've had some of these symptoms, I don't know if it is anxiety or if it isn't. And one of the things that the GP will first give you is something like a K10, which is not a diagnostic tool, but it might just be a little self-measure of psychological distress. And notice it says in the past 4 weeks. Sometimes I ask my clients a bit more than that. Over the last 3 months, how often did you feel some of these things? And again, it's not enough to diagnose you with anxiety, but it might get you to start thinking. If you're saying most of the time or all of the time to a lot of these questions, you might start to think, this is something that I need to address. I think that some of this is to do with mental or psychological distress, and I need to start thinking about what I might want to do about it. So really, it's important that you ask yourself, how long has it been going on for? If it's just a few days or a week, it might not be something that you need to address. If it's become more persistent, it might be something you want to address. So often what stops us, or perhaps what makes us not want to talk about anxiety or mental health in general, is this idea that people will often talk about, and I know that I experience this myself, it's kind of the iceberg illusion. All we see about others is the tip of the iceberg, which is everyone else seems to be coping so well. Other people are posting on Facebook or on Instagram how they've learned how to bake bread, or how they're cooking these amazing meals in lockdown, or other people seem to be coping, they don't seem to get anxious. But what we don't see as human beings, and what I'm really trying to work with, particularly with the young people that I work with, adolescents and teenagers, is starting to understand what's under the surface for all of us human beings is those sorts of things there. It's hard work. We don't always see people's distress. We don't see the fact that a lot of times other people are experiencing disappointments or failures. We don't see that other people are consistently engaging in habits and activities to try and boost their mental health. It just looks like they're coping so well. But once you start to dig under the surface, they might say to you, I'm working really hard, or I've developed some really good habits and I do have to work hard at it. It's not just magic. So I think that's a really important point about, you know, this illusion, which can be really isolating with mental health. I'm struggling, I don't want to talk about it, I think everyone else is coping really well, and it makes us feel alone. And yet we know from the statistics that mental health will affect 1 in 3 of us in quite a severe way, and 3 in 3 of us if we're living a normal life experiencing some of those difficulties. So I'm going to start to move on now to, so what do I do about it? What do I do if I'm noticing this, if I think that I'm plagued by some of it, or if I want to start thinking about some habits? And the things that I'm going to talk to you about now, I'll just say to you, treat it like a menu at a restaurant where I'm going to put all these options to you, and you just pick and choose what makes sense for me. What do I think would work for me? What is it that is helpful? Because remember, what works for one person may not connect for another. But we know with mental health, the more strategies and tools that you have to choose from, the better able you are to manage your good mental health. And so one of the first things is really, particularly with managing anxiety and living well with it, is being really clear about focusing on your inner circle. This work came from many years ago from Stephen Covey when he wrote a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And he really talked about where we want to focus for our own personal effectiveness as well as mental health is the inner circle, which is what I can control. My thoughts, my behaviors, my words, my actions. And the more that we focus there, the better our mental health is, the more we get caught up in the other outer circle, what other people are doing, what they've said to me, how they're behaving, all those things that say, I can't control that. I can't influence that. I need to go back into my inner circle. And so with COVID, there's an example of it. There's lots of other examples besides COVID, but the things within my control, and which we've been practicing for most of this year, we've got really good at it, is if it's within my control, the things that I can do is I can wash my hands, I can wear a mask, I can help other people, I can switch off the news if I'm finding it distressing. The things that are outside of my control, and there was lots and lots of that for many reasons. I can't control how long we're going to be in lockdown. I can't control if there's going to be another third wave. I can't control what other people are doing and how they're following or not following the rules. And so the things outside of my control, sometimes I need to work on emotion-focused coping. And that is, I just need to find ways of accepting or rolling with it. And by acceptance, I don't mean that we're condoning it or we're agreeing with it. Acceptance is a little bit of that saying, you know, it is what it is. I can't control that. And I don't know if any of you, I'm sure it's in the library, I would say, Julie, this book on Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. He was an Austrian psychiatrist who wrote about his experience in the Nazi concentration camps, and a lot of what he wrote about was very much this idea about one of the only freedoms that he had, or one of the only things that he could control at that time in his life, was between his ears, so to speak, his thoughts. And his famous quote, everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. So it's, given this situation, how do I want to respond to it? How do I want to react to it? What do I want to stand for? And I think it still applies very much. When we're talking about healthy coping strategies, no matter what age or stage we are in our lives, we want to be working on how do we help ourselves? That idea about, you know, if you want to feed a person, you can give them a trying to cope better. We have to develop coping strategies that work with us. Now, Julie, I'm just getting a message that my internet connection is unstable. Can you just give me a nod if you can still hear and see me? If I don't hear from you, I'll assume that I'll just keep going.
Yes, it did freeze just briefly, but you're all good now.
All good.
And yes, we do have that book. The one
Man's Search for Meaning?
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Okay, well, just pop up on the screen if I freeze again. I think it's all good. So normally if we were in a room at this time and we had a bit of time together, I would use this opportunity to start writing out. There's actually great knowledge amongst us. You don't have to be a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a mental health professional to have your own strategies. If you think about when you've gone through adversity, maybe this year the lockdown has been a time of adversity for you. Maybe you've gone through loss, grief, difficulty in relationships. And I asked you, what helped you to steer through that adversity? What did you do that helped you to get through that? And when I ask people that question, they'll often come up with things that appear in one of those 4 columns. Some people will say, you know, I turned to yoga, or I went for a daily walk. I went out in nature. Others will say, I had a good cry, or I kept a journal. That's more of an emotional or a mental strategy. Others would say, I've had social connections. I went and talked to a friend. I got together with someone. Others would say, I turned to prayer. I looked at my own spiritual practice. I can see that Brendan's raised a hand. Brendan, did you want to ask something? Do you want to unmute yourself, or have you put it in the chat box? Unmute yourself if you can.
He won't be able to, so if you can just put it in the Q&A.
Yep. If you just want to type a question in the Q&A, Brendan, I'll keep going and then I'll come back to that question.
Brendan's just said, oh, he's made a mistake.
Oh, no worries. Oh, okay. That's the equivalent of like putting your hand up in a room and going, oh no, I was just having a stretch. I didn't want to ask.
Yeah.
It can happen electronically as well, Brendan. Okay, so I'll keep going. I think that what we now know about some of the best strategies for anxiety and what we really want to work on is like it's a ladder. There's a ladder in our body that says, often when we're trying to help someone with anxiety, and you see this sometimes when we're working with young children or even adults, people go to the top of the ladder first, and that is we want to reason. Or don't think that, what about this? Have you thought about it this way? Let's solve this problem. And it's saying that might be really helpful, but you're trying to reason with them, which is the rung at the top of the ladder, and they're still at the bottom of the ladder, which means our body, before we can do any sort of reasoning or thinking or planning to solve a problem, we need to regulate. And regulate is just another word for how do we bring our body back into balance. So if I'm in the middle of a panic attack, if I'm sweating, if I'm really worked up about something, before anything else, I need to know how to regulate, how to settle my body. And one of the best ways to do that is through the breath. There is no coincidence about most first responders, most medical professionals, anyone who works in high, tense environments will say that they will often draw people back to the breath. That's your first method. And I'll talk in a moment about other things for regulation. It says, once I've calmed down, often I'm ready to go up the next part of the ladder to deal with my anxiety, and that is relating. We are social beings. We are connected beings. We are much better at coping with an adversity when we are part of a community or when we're connected with another. So it's often where we'll seek out, you'll see young children will go to their primary caregiver for comfort. You know, I've fallen over, you'll be okay. Or we often go to people for comfort. And so we might be ready to relate or seek out the company of another. And then we can go up to the ladder that says, now that I'm settled, now that I have been comforted or soothed, or I'm in a safe environment with another, I may be now ready to have some of those reasonings or the thinking skills. And we don't want to make that mistake of jumping straight into reason before time. So the first thing about regulating your emotions, this before you work on anything else, is really just saying, get to know your body, get to know what you can do to calm your body. It's one of the first points of call for anxiety. So the first thing is I need to be able to notice it. I need to notice and not be kind of cut off from my body. So for example, some people will say, I think I've had anxiety all of my life, but I've always just thought that my stomach was meant to feel in knots, or I've got so used to it. So we're saying one of the first things is you start to notice. Can you notice the difference between your body at rest and your body when it's really in a state of distress? And you're going, okay, now I can feel it. My heart's beating really fast, or I'm starting to sweat. I'm noticing that. I'm paying attention to it. It's my body's way of saying, hello, can you pay me some attention because something's not okay. Breathing, however you do this, I'll even get you just to do it now. I don't know where you are, where you're sitting. Just for a moment, bring yourself forward in the chair. You can keep your eyes open or closed. Take a couple of really long, deep breaths. Doesn't matter if you've been a bit tense maybe about, you know, will I get the technology to work, or maybe you've rushed from something today. Just notice the effect of if you slow your breath and be really deliberate about it and notice it, what happens. So breathing in, hold for a few seconds and release. And as you're breathing in, just notice the breath, wherever it is that it's most noticeable for you. Maybe you notice the rise and fall of your chest. Maybe you notice your belly expanding and contracting. Maybe you notice the air as it flows in and out of your nostril. Just notice the effect of managing and regulating your breath. Once you do that, sometimes to regulate ourselves, we might ask ourselves a few questions. We might just say, will this matter in 5 years' time? Or might I grow from this? It's just a little question of reassurance. It's not trying to solve a problem. It's just saying, is this as big as I think it is? Is it really a shark in the water that's going to eat me? So if 10 is a major life event that's going to have a massive impact on me, and 0 is this is really trivial, how important is this issue that's got me really worked up? Sometimes people will say, and this is where I said you need to use the menu of a restaurant item. Some people will say, if I'm really agitated and I try and do my breathing, it doesn't work for me. I feel really antsy and I feel more agitated. And for them, I'd say, move your body. Get up, do a little bit of pacing, shake it out. It's sometimes with little kids, we'll say, just go for a run or do some skipping, something that kind of shakes the anxiety around, releases it a bit. Move your body in whatever way that it takes to kind of loosen up or release some of that energy. It's why when we're in high stakes discussions, sometimes we'll say to someone, go for a walk. Go and get a glass of water, do a couple of laps around the outside area, and then let's come back. It can diffuse or it can regulate. The co-regulation, this is what I was talking about before when I said you're moving up the ladder, and you might say, who can I be with that's calm and regulated? And often we're saying to them, you don't have to say anything much, just be with the person. Say, I can see you're really distressed. I'm just going to sit over here and be with you. Do you need anything? Can I get you a glass of water? It's why sometimes services like Lifeline or those telephone counselling lines, often they're great at co-regulating, because it's just having someone with a calm, modulated voice on the other end of the line, someone that's not agitated, someone that can listen and co-regulate. And then when it says sometimes to regulate, you need to identify when you're saturated, meaning I'm overwhelmed with anxiety. With little kids, we see it, and we'll often say, go and have some time out. Just go and sit in your room for a little bit. We'll leave you alone. As adults, we need that too sometimes. There's nothing wrong with that about I just need to go for a walk on my own. In COVID, sometimes people would say to me, the only escape that I had was I would go and sit in my car. I couldn't even drive anywhere far, but I would just sit in my car. And sometimes that's where they would have their therapy sessions. In the darkest sort of moments of COVID, they'd say the only privacy or time out I could get is if I sat in my car. So we're going to take a mindful pause. I don't know what you're doing. We've got about another 20 minutes. For some of you, maybe just have a little stretch in your seat. Others, just close your eyes, take a couple of deep breaths, just noticing what it's like to let your body be at ease. See if it's possible to maybe just drop into your chair wherever you're sitting and take a few moments for your body to register right here in this moment, right now. I'm safe and my body can be at ease. I know that some of you might be looking at your clock thinking, I've got to get to something next, or I have to do this, I have to do that, or some of you might be thinking about what happened this morning. And we know that if we think backwards a lot, that's the area of depression. If we think forwards a lot, that's the area of anxiety. What if this? What if that? When we're really mindful and just try as hard as we can to get in this moment now, we're in the present and we're safe and we're well. So just take a minute or two and we will continue on. So as I said to you before when I was at that ladder where I said the first things that we do before we move into problem solving mode is we get into regulation and we co-regulate or find someone that's safe and try and get that soothing if possible. It isn't always the way. Once we've done that, we're now ready for reasoning. We're now ready to say, this is where I want to start working with my thoughts or with my thought pattern that may not actually be helpful for me. It may be that my thought patterns are the ones that's telling me there's these imaginary sharks all the time. And it may be that this is where I start to set goals and think about what can I do. We're ready for it now. We're at the top of the ladder. So what things might we do? And some of you may have seen this before or may be familiar with it. If you're not, it's fine. It's the basis of a lot of cognitive behavioural therapy that we would do in counselling. But basically, it's very simply put that says if we want to work on our mental and physical health, our whole well-being, we have to pay attention to our thoughts. What we think affects how we feel. We have to pay attention to our emotions. Sometimes people will say, oh, just stick to the issues, you know, don't be so emotional. And it's saying, well, actually, sometimes the emotions are the issues. We can't leave aside our feelings. They're part of our body. And then sometimes we need to pay attention to behaviour. What are we going to do about it? Even if I don't feel great, or even if I'm not thinking in the most positive ways, I can still choose certain behaviours which will be helpful. So for all of us, it's saying the more familiar you get with this triangle, and the only thing that I added in here, sometimes I add in here to be really clear about our body, that our work and our therapy for anxiety doesn't just have to be with our thoughts. We also have to move into and learn that the physical symptoms and the psychological, the mental symptoms work in tandem. So I'll give you a really simple model. This is something that we work with all the time with children, with adolescents, with adults, just who are starting to think about their thought patterns and if they're helpful or not. So in this example with Sam, the activating event might have been, I'm out and my friend was temporarily distracted during our conversation, which can happen. I was talking and she just started to look at her phone, a bit like this. Now, in Sam's model, the belief was, or the thoughts were, I never have anything interesting to say. I must be really boring if she's gone to look at her phone. And then the consequence of that is, I feel anxious and I want to leave. I'm just trying to think about how I can get out of here because obviously I just feel really uncomfortable. And you can see the way those sort of cycles perpetuate themselves. Something happens, I interpret it in a negative or in a kind of critical, self-critical way, and therefore it has a consequence of sparking my anxiety. And if I keep doing that over and over again in many different situations, I can become quite anxious. What we want to work on, and when you've done enough of this practice, and some of you might have got very good at this, some of you might be saying, I've still got some work to do on it, but basically it's saying we want to work on how else might I think about this, or how else could I interpret this event that's a bit more helpful for me, that doesn't leave me feeling so distraught. So it's really just sort of saying, what about if I collected other information rather than just negative information? So my friend was temporarily distracted during our conversation. I might think to myself, well, that can happen. People usually do like to talk to me, but I don't know what distracted her. it's not a big deal, or maybe there was something important. So then the consequence is, when I've thought that, I'll wait until they're done. I'll just go and talk to someone else, or I might even just ask them. I might say, I notice you're looking at your phone. Are you busy? Do you need to answer that? And I had a really good example of that recently when we were still doing face-to-face workshops, when I was delivering some material, and I noticed someone looking at their phone all the time. I was thinking, oh, geez, maybe the talk's really boring. Maybe they don't want to be here. And in the break, the woman did come up to me and she said, I'm sorry if I was distracted. I knew I was sitting at the front and I was looking at my phone. This morning before I came to the workshop, I had to take my dog to the vet. It's been really sick and I was just waiting to hear some news. Wow, did that actually change my thinking and feeling pattern from I must be really boring, she's hating the workshop, to geez, that's really sad. I feel for her because I'm a dog owner and that makes me sad. So just thinking about that. And we won't talk about these a lot now, but it's saying a lot of what can get stuck in our beliefs is we can get really trapped in our own mind with these common thinking traps, things that we tell ourselves that can actually spark anxiety, that can spark worry. So we either tell ourselves all or nothing. You know, something's really good or really bad, or we catastrophize. Oh my God, this is going to be terrible. I'm sure it's going to be a failure. Anything that we do that really hones in and trains our brain to focus on the negative sparks this cycle. And it's saying we weren't born that way, although some might say, you know, it's in my genes, or, you know, I come from a family like that. But what I want to say to you is our thinking is like any other skill or behavior. It can be trained. And we can really deliberately put effort and energy. And you just ask anyone who's done a lot of this sort of work in saying, yes, it does take effort, but I consciously try and work on my beliefs and not get stuck in these traps, and it works. And the final thing that I'll say is I've just tried to summarize in these 5 bubbles, I think what most of the current research and literature would say about people with strong resilience, about high levels of well-being, from a whole range of disciplines: psychology, medicine, psychiatry, alternative therapies. They'll come back to these sort of things that say, yes, traditionally in psychology, we've spent a lot of time maybe overemphasizing some of these thinking traps and working with the brain and saying that is really important. The way that we think and the way that we reshape our thinking will definitely help us to manage our anxiety, but it takes more than that. It's more than that because there are other things that register our body into places right at the beginning of the talk where I talked about that blue zone: calm, safe, connected. These things help. So the 5 things that I'll talk about, and it's referred to as the 5 ways of well-being, is connecting with others. We know that loneliness is one of the key factors for depression or poor mental health outcomes. That doesn't mean being alone. Being alone doesn't equate to loneliness. Some people will say, I'm very happy being alone. Or conversely, I can be in a room full of people and feel lonely. Connected is genuine, authentic connections with someone. It might be a partner, it might be our children, it might be a work colleague, it might be a friend. A genuine exchange of true human connection. We talk, we listen, we feel that there is mutual respect and regard. The second thing we do is being active. We'll know this. There is a stack of research that talks about how important physical exercise is, not only for the physical benefits, but for mental health. We know that the chemicals released almost equate and outperform all the common forms of psychiatric medication for depression, and depression particularly, but anxiety, in regular exercise. 30 minutes, 5 times a week, quite vigorous. Doesn't mean you have to do Ironman sort of exercise, but I often say, even if you're walking, the kind of pace that I like people to imagine is walk like you're running late for a meeting. That's about the level of energy. The taking notice, that's either mindfulness, but it doesn't have to be meditation where people are saying, oh, I don't like to meditate, or I'm not good at meditating. Some people love it. But even just taking notice, when I got you to do that mindful pause before, taking notice is that way of training your mind to focus on the good, especially if you're not good at doing it. What are 3 things that I'm grateful for today? What's one thing out of quite a bad day that I've really enjoyed, or that has brought me a small micro moment of joy? And it might be just that I'm really, really thirsty, and having this lovely sip of water quenches my thirst. Sounds stupid, but it's really just saying, how do I take notice and train my brain to even think about simple pleasures, simple things? And in COVID, that's become really important, because a lot of the big things, going on holidays, going on trips, having big parties, going to major events, it's saying it's really got us to think about the small pleasures. Keep learning. I'm kind of speaking to the converted here, because whoever is listening to this sort of session, you're one of those part of the population who knows the value of how important it is to exercise our mind, to keep learning, to keep that challenge. Remember that very first curve that I showed you, when it says when we're understimulated, when we're not doing anything new, when we don't exercise the mind, our minds and our bodies don't like that very much. So it's, what can I do to keep learning, keep growing, and keep active in my mind? And the final thing is, there's a lot of work, I guess, nowadays that's talking about self-care, or how do you look after yourself, or how do we do these things? And it can be a little bit individualistic or self-focused. And yet the research tells us that those that are the most happy and have the most meaning and higher levels of well-being are those that contribute. So that is, they also, as well as being able to ask for help, they give help, or they give of their time or their words or their presence. And again, that can be in whatever form that it takes. Some people will do major giving. You know, I work in voluntary places for organisations, or I give back to the community. Some will say, I give to my next door neighbour, or it's in a really small way, I give to my pets, or I take in and I look after animals. On whatever scale it is, again, it's just training your body and your mind to work on all aspects of your well-being, and notice that in doing that, yes, your anxiety improves, but a lot of other aspects of your life also improve. So just to finish off, I think I've put in here, I know that some of you will be here at this session, maybe not for yourself, but for others that you're supporting, or maybe you're living with someone who has anxiety, or you have a friend, and it's saying basically those things that are there, you don't have to worry so much about the exact wording of it, but the sentiment of how to support someone who has, I call it an invisible illness. When someone's got a sling and they've broken their arm, we know that they've got an injured arm. With anxiety, often we can't tell, or with depression, it's not always obvious. But if you're noticing that they're not okay, or if you're noticing that something's different, we will always say, as we have Are You Okay Day today, in this day and age, ask people. And all of those questions there are supportive, they're open-ended, they're trying to be non-judgmental, and they're just asking, is there anything that I could do? Would you like some help? I wish that I could take away your pain, or I wish that I could understand better, help me to understand. Whatever it is, just knowing, and sometimes we can be really worried about, I don't want to make it worse. I think that when you're offering someone support in a very open, non-judgmental and non-pushing way, you're never going to make it worse. Just to finish off, some treatment options for anxiety. A lot of what I've talked about today is totally free and available to you because it's in your body and in your mind. You can definitely do the self-help path. Read some books, use some apps. I'm going to tell you which ones I'd recommend. There's thousands of them. Some of you may find counselling or psychotherapy to be of value if it's something where you're saying, I've tried some things on my own, but I feel like I would like to work with a professional. And for some people, even though I'm a psychologist, my area is not medication, they might find that the issue is very persistent and quite severe, and they might need medication. There's a lot of organisations that can help. There's just a few there, but they all have wonderful material online. Places like Beyond Blue, the Black Dog Institute, SANE, lots of resources available online or on the phone, and many organisations that can help. These books, Julie has told me, I think all of them are in the library except for maybe one of them. And I just picked some of them that I used or I referenced in thinking about this talk, but there are so many that you can refer to, and you might like it. Again, it's a shame that we're not all in the room, because sometimes this is lovely where people can sort of offer up, oh, I've used this and I love it and I use that. You can put it in the chat box if there is a book or something that you've really liked reading, or something that you found really helpful. Just type it into the chat box, because it's our way of sharing good practice, and it's lovely bits of connection when we can share good help with one another. And those of you who are more tech savvy, you may already have on your phone apps like these that can really help with the mindfulness or the meditation. I use Smiling Mind with a lot of the young kids. There's some beautiful stories and meditation apps. They use it in a lot of schools. Insight Timer is beautiful. It has lots of variety. You can search up just about anything you want for any length of time in meditation. The Calm app, I use it most days. It's just 10 minutes. The Daily Calm, 10 minutes every day. It doesn't sound like very much, but I find it's manageable. I can muster up 10 minutes, and it does help me to feel more grounded in the beginning of the day. So any of those, my wish for you, thank you so much to those of you who did log on. Thank you to Julie for the invitation. These 4 lines, many of you will be familiar with this lovely loving kindness meditation that we often throw out in a way of giving to others. So we wish this for ourselves, but we hopefully wish it for others, that idea of giving to them. May you be happy as you go on with your day to day. May you be well. May you be safe. May you be peaceful and at ease. And thank you so much. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. And Julie, you can come back on. If you have any questions, now's the time. Jen's just got a quick question. Can I ask what you think about tapping? And tapping is, you'll see it done in different forms. I'm not a somatic therapist. I don't do tapping, but there's lots and lots of evidence, Jen, and there's more and more information, as I said to you, about the need with anxiety to work more than just with our thoughts in CBT, often not being enough. People finding things like tapping or somatic therapy or more body-based therapies as being very effective. And obviously, you know, there's a long way to go. When I trained in psychology 20 years ago, 20 plus years ago, CBT or cognitive strategies were everywhere. And now there's so much more work that says that's great, but that's not enough. And tapping's in one of those. So if you are willing to find a good practitioner who you can work with, I would say absolutely add that to your menu of things to choose from. So thank you. I know that we're on time now, Julie. Thank you so much for the invitation, and I will sign off now. Thanks to all of you for listening.
Thank you.